back to the MMA Plug, powered by DenverSportsBetting.com on Mile High Sports Radio 98.1 FM and streaming live on MileHighSports.com. Time now to talk about the overall state of mixed martial arts in Colorado. And to do that, we bring in the director of the Colorado Combat Sports Commission, Tony Cummings, to chat. Tony, it's Ron Kruk and Jordan Kurtz. Welcome to the MMA Plug, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. It's been too long, and I'm excited to talk about MMA back in the state of Colorado. But before we get to that, Tony, tell our listeners just how long you have worked with the Colorado Combative Sports Commission, and what are some of your job responsibilities?
So I've been with the commission probably a little over 2 years now. I took over for Joseph Mason. I think everybody knows him.
100%.
Yeah, so I run the day-to-day operations of the Combative Sports Commission. So it expands a bunch of different tasks, permit approval, putting the cards together with the promoters, licensing, various things like that. So
awesome.
So if for our listeners out there who aren't aware, what typically goes into that process to put on a show? What are these promoters? What is it? What does that look like from your end? How does that all come together to when fans are finally walking through the gate?
Yeah, sure. So, as with everything, promoters have to have a license with the state. They have to file an event permit for a specific day, and that permit has to have a venue on it along with the weigh-in time and location. And then from there, they just start building their card. They'll match up fighters and they'll send in those those bout cards. And we'll kind of work from there, as fights fall off, as fights get added, we'll make sure everybody has the proper licensing, the proper blood work, the medical tests. And then I'll assign the officials to that event, that specific event. And then we just roll through the event. They're responsible for hiring the event doctor, and we'll just kind of roll through and try to get that done without too many hurdles, I guess would be a good way to put it. So
that's a very good way to put it. And I will say, speaking from my own experience, Tony and his whole organization are fantastic. As I jumped into the world of promoting in 2019, working with the MMA group, a charity group, Mile High 5, and the MMA Mayhem show. And it was a learning experience, as Tony, he's still speaking to me, Jordan. So that's a good thing. And he came on the show. So Tony, hopefully this year things will run a little bit more smoothly, man.
You didn't mess it up, Ron.
Right. Let's go back to, I said 2019, and that's what's so crazy is that, basically the sport was shut down in 2020 with the pandemic. And it was a difficult time for many. For me personally, the LFA, we did our last show in Dallas in March, and then we were done until August. So what was it like for the scene here, and what was it like for the Colorado Commission last year, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, as with everywhere, it just shut down. So there was nothing happening whatsoever. I've never seen anything like it before. It was definitely a tough period, going from 50 to 60 shows a year, basically to nothing, right? Pretty much overnight. So, it was rough on a lot of people. Especially me. I'm sure for the promoters as well, and for the athletes themselves. So, it was it was a really tough time. So,
getting back to fights now, we've had the Colorado Combat Club has put on a show back this last month. Then they're set to put on another show at the end of July. What did that look like, from all ends, getting these shows back going here in front of a live audience in Colorado?
Yeah, it took a lot of work. It took a lot of behind the scenes work when the pandemic was still in effect to try to figure out a reopening plan for the commission. for events in Colorado. So it took a lot of planning. There was a lot of planning that started to go in probably 3 or 4 months after the shutdown. And it took a lot of planning with commission doctors to see what additional medical requirements were going to be needed, if any. And then it took a lot of communication with the promoters to ensure that they knew eventually it'd reopen and eventually there'd be, additional medical requirements. But there's always been a plan in place, and we've always been working on a plan for reopening to try to get it back as soon as possible.
And with that said, Tony, Jordan mentioned the Colorado Combat Club came back. That was in Pueblo. That was the first live MMA show in Colorado since the pandemic hit. Do you foresee the MMA scene here in Colorado picking up this summer, or is it going to be something where maybe we're looking at fall again?
It's hard to say. We've seen some shows come back in the summer. I'm hoping that more shows come back in the summer. I think realistically, probably early fall before we see a full court press towards promotions coming back, just because they too have to recover and figure out how they're going to go about putting on shows. So realistically, maybe early fall. I hope, like I said, that it picks up in the summer for sure. But realistically, it's probably going to be early fall before you see a full court press for promoters coming back.
Understood.
Generally speaking, with Colorado being such a hotbed and an epicenter for the sport, how much pressure have you and the commission as a whole felt to get things back going? Has it been something like a weight or a monkey on your back the entire time?
Yeah, I think, it's unprecedented, right? So there's been a lot of pressure, probably self-induced to come up with a plan. So when the, restrictions were lifted, that we could get right back to work. So think of it, a lot of it was self-induced. I know there were a lot of promoters reaching out, asking, consistently when we were going to reopen. And I really didn't have an answer because, that was taken out of my hands, and rightfully so. But there's been a lot of self-induced pressure to have a reopening plan that provides, promoters the opportunity to reopen, but at the same time provides the safety net that's needed for the athletes and the corners and the officials and that sort of thing.
We are speaking with the director of the Colorado Combative Sports Commission, Tony Cummings. And Tony, you've been busy despite the lack of events, making some changes to some current rules and the rule system, including therapeutic use exemptions. And I want to talk about that because it's a very progressive move by you and the Colorado Commission. So give us some details on TUEs.
Well, I think for those listeners or people that don't know, TUEs are something that's included in the WADA standards. There's never been one granted in the United States before for any prohibited substance. We did have a former UFC fighter petition the commission for a TUE based on the cannabis usage. That TUE was reviewed by the commission doctors and it was granted by the commission. So it's something that has never been done, like I said, in the United States before. So we were, for one reason or another, they chose to petition, and the commission decided to grant it based on the medical history of that fighter and the documented usage of cannabis for certain conditions that he was facing.
Very interesting. And I'm guessing you can't let us know who that was, correct?
It was Elias, and I'm going to butcher his last name, and I apologize, Theodora.
Oh, yeah.
He's a Canadian fighter. Yeah. So he was the first one that petitioned the commission and was granted a TUE.
And do you feel that'll open up some more doors for more TUEs to be granted?
I'm not sure if it'll open more doors for them to be granted. I hope it opens the door for discussion on TUEs in general. I think there's a stigma surrounding certain prohibited substances that, may need some additional conversation amongst different commissions. So it's my hope that it'll start a conversation about it, given given the legalization of certain substances by different states. So, but, most commissions are autonomous. So we just did it based on what we felt was appropriate at the time and granted the petition.
Now, to pair off of that, we've seen this shift kind of happen in the NFL as well as Major League Baseball, the NBA, with certain substances like cannabis. Do you think that wave that's being more widely accepted across some of the, say, call it the big four or the major corporate level sports, do you think that influence will have some sort of trickle down effect?
Yeah, I think it already has, right? I think it's, WADA's recognized it as a, if you can document it. And I think the major sports industries are starting to, take notice, just in general. Of course, with the bigger, organizations like the NFL and the NBA, you do have the unions that are involved. So they do hold a lot of power, unlike MMA, who doesn't. So, I do think that it's going to be more part of the conversation moving forward in those industries.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is some change on its way. Tony, as we have you and your team do a fantastic job here in the state of Colorado. What I have seen with the LFA, we did several shows out in Wichita, Kansas, and the Kansas Commission is pretty progressive as well. And they've said, hey, we can try new things because we are Kansas. We're not Las Vegas. And one of the things we do is not only the use of instant replay, but the open scoring system. And if our listeners don't know what that is, basically the commission shows the corner in between rounds how the judges have scored it. And we on the broadcast side get to see exactly how the judges have scored that round and the fight as it progresses. Now, the corner has the option to either relay that information to their fighters or not. And strangely enough, I thought every corner would do that. But in my time there, I've learned that isn't the case. There are some corners that they don't want their fighters to know. They just want to keep with the strategy. So for me, I think it's very interesting to have that type of option. What is your take on the open scoring system that Kansas is using? And do you think that is something that Colorado would consider?
Yeah, so my take on the open scoring is I don't think some of the stigma that surrounded open scoring is valid. Some of the concerns that were brought up initially when open scoring was proposed, I don't think have any validity anymore as far as the data that's been gathered. So is it something that Colorado would consider? Absolutely. I would need to do a little bit more research on it and see what type of results they're getting in Kansas. I think from a commission standpoint, it really comes down to logistics and how that could be done in a fair and consistent manner. So that would be, a hurdle, obviously, because, commissions operate on a certain amount of budgetary allotment. So logistically, it would be a hurdle, but is it something that I would support? Absolutely. If it added value to a promotion, or to the commission in general, it's something that I would support.
That's awesome.
That's awesome to hear that it's just something that's even open for discussion. I wanted to ask you about another rule, which it came up. I did commentary for the Colorado Combat Club show last month, and it was something that came up a couple of times. Fighters were they were warned in advance of it, but fence grabs now being automatically, no question, a point deduction. Obviously, fans out there, they're used to sometimes seeing a warning in the cage. They were a little bit upset and, had their pleasantries to say for the point deduction. So straight from you, can you kind of let the listeners and the fans out there know what the change specifically is or how it's being enforced differently?
Well, there really hasn't been a change, to be quite honest with you. If you get into the unified rules, which Colorado follows and most states, actually I think all states follow now, fence grabs are one of those fouls that don't require an intent. right? So if you read the rules specifically, you can, as a fighter, grab the fence at any time or put your fingers through the fence. Where it becomes illegal is when it controls your own body position or your opponent's body position. And if you read the rule, it says that the referee shall take a point. Now, shall is non-discretion. There's no warning, right? So that's really the black and white interpretation of the rule, right? And so, the unified rules, red, black, and white, don't allow for warnings, right? And I don't know whether they should or not, but if you go by the rules, and the expectation is when you fight that the referee will go by the rules, there's no warning that's given, because it's not, intent is not required, right? And so I can give you perfect examples of, fence, a fighter putting their toes or fingers through the fence that affected the outcome of a fight, and I don't think that, commissions may not understand that a fighter that's on the bubble, let's say an LFA, and one win could propel them to the next level, but a loss could set them back, where they have to get 3 more wins. That's a big deal. Sure. Right? So when you interpret rules, you have to interpret them how they're stated.
Very good point. Yeah, that's such a, and I love the analogy with the LFA. You're so close, and if one of those losses could set you back a couple years, and as you stated, most definitely, a couple wins to get back into being considered. So, Tony, we truly appreciate your time. One last question for me, but as you look at the current rule system here in Colorado, of course, you're following the unified rules. What is one of the rules that maybe you'd like to see tweaked, or what do you feel is maybe one of the bigger issues that MMA needs to address?
Well, I think it's, from an overarching perspective, it's the consistent application of the unified rules. That would be the first thing. From a personal standpoint, the 12-6 elbow needs to be addressed. I think there's research that indicates that it's actually less dangerous than a hammer fist from any position, standing, side control, or mounted. So I definitely think that conversation needs to start again. If I had a magic wand, that's what I would do, at least start to address that rule.
I love it.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because I've long since held the position as well that, if you have someone that can throw, a spin and wheel kick, the force generated of that heel impacting the skull is going to be much greater than you'll have from a 12-6 elbow from any position. So I love hearing that coming from you. So that validates a lot of what I've said for years.
Yeah, and I think there's some scientific, there's some research that indicates that. So I don't think that rule, based on the research that I've seen, I just don't know if it's valid anymore. Maybe it was valid at the time it was implemented, but, given the research, which, as we move forward in a scientific world and data is king, I just don't think that argument has much validity anymore.
Yeah, I agree. Tony Cummings, we appreciate the insight and your opinion. Hopefully things will blow up again here in the state of Colorado as MMA returns. I know the LFA is hoping to be back here in the fall, and of course the Mile High Five charity event in October. We appreciate your time. Let's do this again sometime, okay?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, time for a quick timeout. You are listening to the MMA Plug, powered by DenverSportsBetting.com on Mile High Sports Radio.